to the Dr. DC podcast. My name is Dr. DC, and once again flying solo this week because Richard is off sick. But that's okay. You know, listen, we're having fun here. We're having a good time. We're sitting down for a nice little calm listen with your good friend Dr. DC. You know, each week, we're just going to do this casual conversational. Like, each week, we talk about the weird and wonderful world of DC. We answer listener questions from listeners like, oh, God. Okay, hang on. This is proof positive that I need Richard back. Jesus Christ. All right, here we go. I'll edit all that out. By that, I mean I won't. We're going to take this all again. Everybody just strap in. You didn't hear anything. Here we go. Welcome to the Dr. DC podcast. My name is Dr. DC, flying solo this week because Richard is off sick still. That's totally fine, though. We're going to have a good time. Each week, we talk about the weird and wonderful world of DC while fielding questions from listeners like you. Nailed it. First try. One and done. Never have to repeat myself. Never have to take a mulligan. Listen, hey, we're into May. We're getting into summer up here in the Yukon. The sunshine is out. There's still the sun up right now while I'm recording, and it's almost 11 at night right now. So it's time of year. I'm feeling energetic. We're feeling good. It's time to have some fun themes. I think it's a good time of year for that. We're not in the middle of winter when Richard kept picking like heavy, like socio-political themes for the show, or prescribed reading month where he kept trying to make me cry on the Patreon. It's May. Let's have some fun. And I thought, what's more fun than talking about the plethora of ape characters in DC? That's right. We're going ape shit this week. DC is full of ape characters. This is just like a known quantity. It's a thing that we've talked about a bit on the show, or at least it's come up sort of in conversation. But I thought it'd be fun to dive in to talk about some of these different characters and get up to some monkey business. Oh, this shit is bananas. Hey, let's just hop right in, shall we? Let's talk about apes, okay? Not monkeys. They wouldn't like that. So let's go to Facebook, go into the face and the book, go into the Facebook. First question comes from Gary and Chetha, who asks, could an ape-themed comic book work today? What would be happening in year 3 of that comic book? Listen, with questions like this, the answer is always, of course it could work. We did just get the April special that featured sort of interconnected and different stories of a bunch of the different ape characters in DC, which I think is a lot of fun. That's just a one shot, but that does, like, you could have an ape themed comic book. Now, it depends what you mean by this, because like Monkey Prince totally held down his own title while it was running, that 12 issue maxi series. Monkey Prince could absolutely hold down a title. But are we talking like a full series that fit the model of that April special, where the only characters, like the only main characters in it are apes, were like Detective Chimp, Sam Simeon, Monsieur Mala, Titano, etc., etc., etc.? That's maybe a slightly different proposition than just giving Monkey Prince a book again, or giving Detective Chimp a book or something like that. So, I mean, if that's what you mean by ape themed, of course it could work. It becomes a little specific, but the weirder ideas have had longer runs, I would say. I don't think there's anything that's like an absolute barrier to it. If anything, I think it's kind of like a fun hook. As for like what would be happening, I think that has a lot less to do, to be honest, with them being apes and more to do with who your main characters are. If it's year 3 and it's a Detective Chimp book, it's obviously some kind of like big, like simian mystery, it would be fun to transpose the stuff that you would do in Gotham Central into like Gorilla City or something like that. Like Detective Chimp is in Gorilla City and they brought him in where Sam Simian brought him in to help on a case because like the mayor is corrupt, or you know what I mean? Like that kind of shit would be fun to treat Gorilla City like it's Gotham or like it's Metropolis or something like that, as opposed to treating it like Atlantis or like Themyscira, which is more how it's used. It's used as like a nation, which is fair. And because it's sort of fantastical and hyper advanced in that, but it would be fun to play off the street level side of it a little bit more. But that would be one version of it. But if your main character is like Monkey Prince, then it's probably something more fantastical and magical. If your main character is Monsieur Mala, then it's got a more of a villainy slant, or maybe it's more of a romance. Maybe in year 3, we're really diving into that sort of fraught relationship with the brain. You know, I think that maybe where I'm going with this is the key to the ape book is that the apes, you treat that like how you treat superpowers. That's a fun thing to read about. It's a fun thing to see, and it's a good hook to get people in the door. But to get people to keep reading your book and to make it successful, it ultimately has to come down to good characters, good stories. You know what I mean? So the ape thing isn't more of a hook or than superpowers. It's just a different one. But I think you still have to have stories to tell. They can't all just be like novelty things about ape characters. All right. Next question comes from Beyond the Batcast podcast. Hey, we know those guys. My episode I guested on just came out this week. I talked about Heart of Ice, a great episode of Batman the Animated Series. So go check that out. Beyond the Batcast podcast asks, are there any kaiju-sized apes in the DC universe? I seem to recall... Well, okay. There's a couple of different ways to answer this. So here we go. In the long and complicated history and retconned history of a character like Giganta... Giganta, Wonder Woman villain who can go kaiju size, can get super tall, taller than buildings, really huge, right? In her original appearance, Giganta was a super intelligent gorilla whose brain was transplanted into the body of like Strong Woman or something like that. Or got like evolved, you know what I mean? Like one of those kind of things into like a super strong woman. Then that changed to being, eventually it changed to being that Doris Zool, her mind got transferred into a gorilla's and then got transferred into a metahuman body that could grow. That's not quite the same as being an ape that can get giant, but it is a person who at one point in time was an ape or was sort of living in an ape's body and who then later could also grow, but wasn't a growing gorilla, if that makes sense. Giganta is maybe like in on a technicality, let's call it. The other one I throw out there, though, is Titano. And I think maybe even the Harley Quinn cartoon it's not the Harley Quinn cartoon. It's Superhero Girls. Or Justice League Action. It's like one of those cartoons riffs on the idea that Harley knew Titano. It might be Superhero Girls. And Titano comes back from space as this like huge, enormous ape. In the comics, Titano is often depicted as like a robot, like a giant android. Sometimes is enormous, truly giant, like a gorilla robot. But not the same size as like a King Kong. I don't think. Maybe once or twice it's been that big, but not generally. We're not generally talking about like the size of a full skyscraper. You know what I mean? Yeah, interesting. Kaiju-sized apes. Those are kind of the big ones. For the most part, the ape situation in DC is that they maybe have other powers or things like that, but they're generally still more or less the regular size of their species, whether you're a chimp or a gorilla. All right, next question. Next question comes from John Spees, who asks, could a Detective Chimp cartoon in a more adult style, i.e. Invincible or Harley Quinn, be successful? If so, how would you style a season and who would voice Detective Chimp? I think a good model for something like Detective Chimp is, there's an element of Detective Chimp that is Holmesian in that he is that much of a genius, that difficult to get along with, and also like give Detective Chimp booze in place of Holmes doing like heroin or whatever, and essentially you basically have a lot of the same sort of like prickly personality beats. So there is something to be said for making Detective Chimp vaguely Holmesian. I also think there is something to the idea of he, from a personality perspective, and just to like, I'm trying to think of this like as a pitch, like you take recognizable things, and then I think he's also, well, I guess these other procedurals are also riffing on Holmes in a way. Something like, I was thinking of something like House, right? A guy who is like so painfully awful to work with, but is also so fucking right all the goddamn time that you're sort of forced to put up with him. And it's a sort of interesting scenario, I think, to be stuck in, but that's a good one. I think ultimately, maybe even more than with Holmes, with a character like House or something like that, you do have a better opportunity to dig into the self-loathing thing. Detective Chimp is aware of his personality, is aware of his issues, and is largely unhappy. Like being granted super intelligence as a chimp has not made his life better. Like, if anything, it just made him aware that he was treated unequally. Like, in the comics, there's a whole thing where, like, people wouldn't pay his invoices because he wasn't human and wouldn't hold up in a court of law and shit like that. And he faced, racism and stuff like that. He drinks. He feels like he's a failure. He's so smart that he kind of has this sort of nihilist streak to him. He's worried that he can't live up to the potential that he has or to the expectations people have of him. We see that in, Justice League Dark, with him taking up the sword of Mira and supposedly being the protector of that realm and really forsaking that duty, sort of falling down on the job even of running the Oblivion Bar. I think there's a lot you could dive into there. And then the flip side of that, because that's all relatively heavy, is you can find the humor in those things in a sort of dark BoJack Horseman-y sort of vibe. I absolutely think a Detective Chimp cartoon would work. I also think Detective Chimp is just a great character to have bomb into something else, though, too, right? Yeah, I don't know how I would style the season necessarily. Who would I want to voice him? I know on Batman the Brave and the Bold, they gave him this very like Shakespearean sort of voice or something like that, like where he was like very much a detective, But I always kind of read Detective Chimp as having a little bit more of like a, I don't know, like a Steve Buscemi kind of like someone like a little gruffer, a little, I don't know, something more like that. Steve Buscemi. I can't believe that's where I landed with that. Yeah, Steve Buscemi as Detective Chimp. That's sort of where I'm going with that. Yeah. How do you do, fellow apes? All right, let's leave Facebook and head on over to Threads. Threads. And first question on Threads comes from Cactuar David, who asks, why do you think Ultra Humanite isn't nearly as well known as other Superman villains like Lex and Brainiac, despite predating both of them? What do you think could be done to boost his popularity? That's a really interesting question. So, the Ultra Humanite, for those who don't remember, if you've seen him in comics, you've likely seen him as a big albino gorilla with a sort of like extra large cranium, that vaguely brain kind of looking like. And he wears this big red kind of like battle harness thing. The Ultra Humanite, that's like the main way that people see him. If you remember him from Justice League Unlimited, that's what the Ultra Humanite looked like on that show. Ultra Humanite showed up in the 3rd season of Stargirl. He's been in other things. He has the distinction as a character of being the first supervillain that Superman ever fought. Ultra Humanite first appears in, it's like Action Comics like 13 or something like that. He's even before Alexei Luthor, the Golden Age Lex Luthor. So the Ultra Humanite, here's the thing though, that gorilla form, that's not his first form. So the whole point to the Ultra Humanite was that he was supposed to be the total opposite of Superman. And what I'm about to describe to you eventually sort of becomes Lex, where Superman was physically gifted and powerful. The Ultra Humanite had super trained his brain so that he was like the preeminent thinker, master scientist, whatever of his day. And he would apply his brain to crime, in that very like Golden Age kind of way where you announce it. But here's the thing. His first 4 appearances are just him as basically a mad scientist or mad strategist, sort of Moriarty, sort of, proto Lex Luthor-y type that is committing crimes and doing shit like that. He's presumed dead at some point in there. But like for 4 or 5 appearances, he just shows up like that. Then there's a thing where his body is dying or something, and he has his brain transplanted into the body of an actress named Dolores Winters. And so then for several adventures, he poses as Dolores Winters and, seduces people to get his way or whatever. And so then the Ultra Humanites thing became that he was a brain in a different body. And then Dolores Winters either was dying or whatever, or I can't remember the exact circumstance of it, but eventually it's his brain transplanted into the body of this albino gorilla. So the Ultra Humanite's shtick eventually becomes that he is this, like, beyond just being a generally smart scientist and evil guy, it's that he has a particular specialty for this brain transplantation sort of mechanism, basically. Here's the real catch, though, is that the Ultra Humanite had, I don't know, call it a dozen appearances in the Golden Age and Silver Age, and then died and didn't come back. I'm relatively sure that the albino gorilla thing doesn't come around until like the 70s or the 80s. It's actually very late. So part of what we're talking about here is that this very early, very classic, very notable Superman foe doesn't really take their most iconic form for 50 years, essentially, or 40 years at least. So there's something sort of interesting about that too, because From that point on, even if, Ultra Humanite's brain is transplanted into other bodies since then, we generally think of albino gorilla, red battle harness kind of thing. And, yeah, the other thing too is that in the Silver Age, even before the gorilla thing, the Ultra Humanite sort of got shifted over to being a bad guy of Earth 2, of the Justice Society. And what that means is that, yeah, you'd show up when they would do their like kind of annual team up sort of episodes, issues. But it meant that he wasn't really as much of a feature of the mainline continuity of DC. So I think that's another reason why he probably is a little bit more obscure than we may feel that he should be. An interesting character, though. A cool design. I mean, he's... what would I do to boost his popularity? I mean, I'm not sure what else you could do. He was the main bad guy of the third season of a much-loved TV show. He has appeared in cartoons. He's in, like, DCUO. He's in video games. He shows up in comics. He was in comics within the last year or so. He's in Monkey Prince. He was in even Earth 2 Society back during, the New 52 and stuff like that. He was in Superman and the Authority. Like, Ultra Humanite's around. So I don't really know what else you could do to... Ultra Humanite is very, very minorly makes an appearance in Young Justice. Is part of the Injustice gang or Injustice League or whatever, the one with the Brent Spiner Joker. Ultra Humanite's in there. Yeah, I don't know what else you could do. I mean, Monkey Prince, the Monkey Prince one is interesting. Yeah, God, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think part of it too is like... there are just a lot of gorilla characters. And then when you get to the point where it's like, he's not even a real gorilla. He's a human brain in a gorilla body. There's some bits you can play there. Like Grodd hates that. He's basically like an abomination in Grodd's eyes, right? But, yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe Ultra Humanite will show up more because we have this Justice Society book now. Maybe, we'll start pulling Ultra Humanite in there. But yeah, I don't really know what you could do to make the character more popular. All right. Next question from JVideo13, who asks, if you were changed into an ape, a la JL Ape, would you resist the urge to fling your own shit, or would you embrace the urge? Listen, I know we've all seen videos of apes doing this, but I feel like this must be just like a negative ape stereotype. They must fucking hate that this is what we go to every time. Go, oh, you fling your shit or whatever. It's like, some of us do. Those guys are assholes. Yeah, I mean, just a quick reference here. So JL Ape, there's a story where basically the Justice League gets turned into a bunch of apes. There's like a de-evolution field or ray or some shit like that Grodd has. And they all turn into apes. I think they do a version of that on Justice League Unlimited too, which is an interesting episode. Yeah, let's see. If I was turned into an ape, first of all, I should say like one of my my favorite animal at all is a gorilla. I think gorillas are amazing. I think they're so. I know technically, genetically, we're most similar to chimps, but there's something about gorillas. You just look in their eyes and like, I wish I knew like gorilla sign language or something like that, just because they've got stuff to say and they're thinking, and they're just the most interesting creatures. I fucking love gorillas. So I would hope, fingers crossed, that that's the sort of ape I would turn into if I was in a scenario like JL Ape. I mean, in terms of embracing the urge, I don't know that the fling and shit thing is the top of the pile for me, but if we're talking about would I embrace being an ape, absolutely I fucking would. I would be, yeah, right away. I'd be doing all the, like, you know, I'd be practicing like the running with, you know, my knuckles down. I'd be like, oh man, I'd be climbing. I'd be hanging off stuff. I'd be using my super strength to fucking lift stuff. I would do all sorts of fucking fun, cool ass shit if I was a gorilla all of a sudden. And I guess if that included throwing shit, I suppose I would do it. Although knowing me, I would probably put it in a bag first and then use it like a sort of like David slingshot kind of scenario. It's an insane way to answer that question. All right, we're leaving Threads and we're heading on over to Instagram. Now we're going to Instagram, take some questions and answer them. And the first question on Instagram comes from Delgado Andrew, who asks, has anyone attempted a grand unifying theory of DC's sapient apes? Some mutagen in Gorilla City that also found its way to Detective Chimp, etc. I don't know if someone tried a full grand unifying theory. Like, the problem is they all have different origins. You know, like Monsieur Mala is made intelligent by the brain. I don't know that they ever explain how, but the brain's just like, I used science to give this ape like a 180 IQ or whatever. That's Monsieur Mala. Detective Chimp follows Rex the Wonder Dog to the Fountain of Youth and drinks from it. It makes Detective Chimp hyper intelligent and also gives him the ability to communicate with any animal. So he has that ability. You know, then there's obviously Gorilla City, a city full of sentient gorillas. In the early days of Gorilla City, the telepathic thing that Grodd has was like an ability like only one gorilla could have or whatever. Solivar had it, Grodd took it, and that kind of shit. But so there's a bunch of apes that are then connected to this group of sentient apes. So Sam Simeon is eventually retconned as Gorilla Grodd's grandson. There's Gorilla Grimm, who we've seen in the pages of Nightwing and stuff like that. That's Gorilla Grodd's son. Let's see. Other characters. Jackanapes is it was like the Joker's kind of pet. Monkey Prince has a background that is partly like Chinese mythology and partly weird Kryptonian Phantom Zone science. So that's Monkey Prince. Titano, like I said, robot. Yeah, there's sort of all over the place. So as far as there being one grand unifying theory, I would say there isn't one. However, I did stumble across this one thing that, to be honest, I had never read before, but I came across it basically in one story, in like an anthology series. It's like DC All-Stars or something like that. There is one story that was printed and then largely ignored, and its canonicity probably even at the time was disputed, but is now almost definitively not true, is that Gorilla City itself was transplanted from another planet. That those sentient gorillas came from a different planet and settled on Earth. The newer version of that, though, is that Gorilla City is at like a Speed Force nexus on Earth. In the New 52, they played around with this idea that Gorilla City had a sort of more ancient reverence or connection or knowledge or awareness of the Speed Force. They also connected it to Atlantis with like an old portal and stuff. Like, this is the thing I'm talking about. Gorilla City is sort of treated as like one of these sort of like mythological kingdoms, like Themyscira, like Atlantis or whatever. But no, as far as a grand unifying theory of like, is Beppo the super monkey also connected to, like, no, not really. They're not really all that connected. And I don't think anyone has gone to the trouble of I think you could probably, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that if humans have the metagene, there must be some, or there could feasibly be some version of the metagene in our closest genetic relatives. That's not a wild stretch. I don't know that anyone's ever actually said that in a comic or done it out loud, but like that's not crazy. Especially as a way to describe the varying levels of sort of like ape ability. Some are just sentient and smart. Some of them are hyper smart. Some of them have telepathy. Some of them have other powers. I think there's an argument to be made that the metagene could be more of a primate thing and not just a hominid thing. But no, as far as I know, there is not just one explanation in universe, that is, for why there's so many gorilla characters. Now, is there an explanation out of universe? The story is, and, take this with a grain of salt, but the story is that there was some kind of market research that indicated that, like, kids love apes, and some, like, exec or editor or someone was like, put an ape on the cover all the time. This is in the Silver Age, of course. And they were just like, always do it, always do it. And that's why there's so many of these characters in different places, like how Giganta was at first a gorilla character. Then there was also Gorilla Grodd fighting the Flash, and then there was also, Detective Chip, also Ultra Humanite, also, which is sort of funny in its own way. Jimmy Olsen has turned into a gorilla a couple of times in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. He married one time. We talked about that on that Jimmy Olsen episode, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there's Angel and the Ape. That's the Sam Simeon, Angel O'Day, like detectives kind of thing. So there's quite a few out there, and yeah, the I don't know how true it is, but the story is that it was not a mandate passed down from the top, but it was like a strong suggestion that's like, we know kids love gorillas, put gorillas on the cover of the comic, and that's where characters like Titano and stuff like that all came from, which I think is very funny. All right, let's move on to the next question. Next question is from Alfred Izzaddy, who asks, what is the story of Solovar? So, if you watched the Flash TV show, Solovar is in that show. In season 2, when they go to Earth 2, Gorilla City is there. We actually go to Gorilla City, which, like, again, just remember how fucking good that goddamn show was in those early years. Solovar in general is like the rightful and good, quote, leader of Gorilla City that Grodd is always trying to usurp or fight or whatever. Like I said, in the first kind of appearances of Gorilla City, Solovar had what do they call it? Force of mind or something like that. Whatever that telepathic ability was, Grodd took it from him, and Flash helped Solovar get it back, basically. Essentially, Solovar is there as the main gorilla rival of Gorilla Grodd. Obviously, Grodd is fighting Flash, or he brings an army to America to take over, or he's whatever. He's doing his own schemes and plans. But his main gorilla rival is Solovar, the sort of like like I said, the rightful ruler of Gorilla City, a more benevolent leader, a good leader. He's generally depicted as being more kind of gray or silver than Grodd, who's generally portrayed with like black fur and things like that. What else is there to say about Solovar? I mean, to be honest, Solovar's not a character that I necessarily have plumbed the depths of, but that's his main function usually in those stories, is a sort of a cultural antagonist to Grodd, because obviously the Flash is the super rival, but there's a sort of political rivalry between Solovar and Grodd as well. All right, next question comes from Jack Stonewall. Oh my God, it's happening. Jack Stonewall asks, will we see Congorilla Bill again? What is his role in the future of DC? So we're mixing up terms a little bit here. So Congorilla and Congo Bill. By the way, one and the same. But I'm making the distinction because we've almost certainly talked about him before, but the idea is that Congo Bill, in the sort of vein of characters like Bwana Beast or whatever, is like a white, intrepid explorer in Africa who ends up with like cool Africa-based like magic, even though he is a white guy and an outsider and a colonialist and imperial sort of power or whatever. So, in the case of Congo Bill, he's like he's on the hunt for like this mystic gorilla or whatever, and he is in the jungle and he's looking for shit, and then he gets trapped in this cave, and there's a cave in or whatever, and he can't get out, and he finds a magic ring or something like that, and he rubs this magic gold ring, and his mind is magically transported into the body of the legendary golden gorilla. The Congorilla is what he becomes. But it means that his like body, his corpse is just sort of like left in the cave. If anyone played the old Prince of Persia 2, Shadow in the Flame, it's when you become Shadow. Like, it's like that kind of idea. Your corpse just like fucking stays behind, and then he would be in the Congorilla's body, and eventually I think Congo Bill's body is destroyed and he's stuck as the Congorilla. Congorilla is not like a main character in DC, if you can imagine. And like, I couldn't even tell you the last time Congorilla showed up. I have an issue or two of a 4-issue Congorilla miniseries. But truly the last time that he showed up or was relevant or played like a role in anything, like I don't even know that I would go so far as to say he's ever played like a role in something. He's been in stories and that, but I think there's a big stretch between being in a story and maybe being like, you know, relevant for an issue or something like that versus like having a sort of legacy as a character, you know, like I wouldn't put him up against any of the other apes already mentioned, basically. If I had to make a guess for what his role in the future of DC would be, I think it's likely that the only way to move forward with that character is to do the same sort of thing that we did with Bwana Beast, which is get the white guy out of there. I think is important. Although, like, as a white guy, even pitching this, the idea of like a black character that like turns into an actual ape feels problematic. I'm sure there's a way to do it that isn't, but I sure wouldn't want to be the one writing it. I feel like that's a tightrope. So I don't know. It's a tricky proposition. I think Congorilla is one of those characters that's like a fun in thing to reference, and like not someone you want to spend a ton of time with, essentially. Yeah. There we go. So that's it for Instagram. Before we head on over to some more questions, let's take a wee little break.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. This time of the year can be tough. It's cold and dark outside, and you feel like you're all peopled out. How do you set boundaries and give yourself the alone time you need? Most people don't have an endless social battery. Therapy can help you listen to your body and give yourself the time to recharge. In the past few years, I have made choices that have improved every part of my life, and I honestly wouldn't have been able to do any of it without therapy. Through therapy, I have gained confidence and learned to draw important boundaries. If you want to make things better or just a bit easier, or you want somebody to talk to, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, so it's easier to fit into any schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you can even switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/DrDC today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DRDC.
And we're back. We're going to head on over now to Reddit, where everyone's nice and no one's ever mean. And we got a question on Reddit from Bangarang8, who asks, how many of the currently frequently appearing apes, Detective Chimp, Grodd, Mala, etc., are directly attributable to the Silver Age editorial mandate to put gorillas on covers? Because market research said young boys like gorillas. There you go. It's right there. Directly attributable. Well, I mean, Grodd's probably an obvious one. Because that's definitely in the Silver Age that Grodd appears. Mala might be later. Mala, I think, maybe doesn't appear until... I'm talking out of school now, but is Mala a Morrison contribution? That's tricky. Let's see. When does Mala first appear? I'm just going to have a quick look. No, okay, sorry. No, Mala is in the 60s. Yeah, that's an Arnold Drake, Bruno Premiani creation. So then, no, never mind. I think maybe Morrison's contribution is that Mala and the Brain are in love with each other, but Mala would have already been part of the Brotherhood of Evil then, if he's a creation of Drake. Yeah, let's see. Grodd and Mala count then. Detective Chimp would count, I think. Because he appears, like I said, in Rex the Wonder Dog. I think there's also like a bunch of one-offs, the Jimmy Olsen stories that I mentioned. I think that those are pretty key. The fact that even in the Silver Age for Wonder Woman, when Giganta wasn't just an ape, they still like bothered to put like an ape step in there. Like Dr. Psycho was involved in like mind transference things with this character, but there was still an ape and things like that. Like we kept circling back to that idea. I think Titano in Superman is probably part of that. I know he's not an ape, but Beppo the Super Monkey, almost certainly part of that. Oh boy, I'm sure there's some sort of like aqua ape or some sort of insane one-off thing in a different book. Those are probably the big ones. The ones you could. Sam Samian would be part of that. I mean, a decent number of them. Certainly not all, and maybe not all in terms of how important they would become to DC, but I suspect that you'd fill this roster out with like a relatively good spoonful of like random one-off things that weren't even like recurring characters or sort of ape villains or whatever, and more just like, oh, in this issue, while Batman is fighting the Penguin, they go into a zoo and Penguin releases a bunch of animals, and guess what? There's a bunch of gorillas. We can put that on the cover. I suspect there's quite a bit of that as well. Like any excuse to sort of get animals and ape characters in general into the spotlight. I imagine there's quite a bit of that too. Yeah, that's a good question. I like that. That's great. All right, next question comes from Arpit the Hero, who asks, who is Space Ape? If I'm not mistaken, Space Ape is like, I think, just an Earth gorilla who in the Sinestro Corps. Now, what era would this be? Early Rebirth era? Not like, I'm not talking about like Green Lantern Rebirth. I'm talking about like DC Universe Rebirth, whenever that was, 2015, 2016. Somewhere in there, I am positive there's a Sinestro Corps member who's a gorilla, and I'm positive that's Space Ape. But truly, I couldn't tell you his name. I couldn't tell you like how he got a Sinestro Corps ring. I don't know if he was like already an intelligent ape, like from Gorilla City, or if it's like a Dexstar situation. I know very, very little, admittedly, about Space Ape, but I would put, I'd put $20 down that he's a Sinestro Corps member. Or at least was. Yeah, there you go. So let's leave Reddit and let's head on over to the Docscord. Oh, fuck. Okay, hang on. I could do this. Docscord. Hey, it's the Docscord. What's it like in Docscord City? I'm a scored away to Docs, but don't you dock because it's so scoredy. Docscord you. Jesus Christ. Fucking this. I'm going crazy with it, Richard, here. Not that I was great at these songs with him present, but now I'm just like, truly, this is the scenario. It's 11:30 at night, the night before this episode comes out. So I've put this off as long as I can. I had like 4 or 5 coffees today. I had a bunch of painkillers to deal with my cough and things like that. I just watched The Wolverine as prep for Cerebros this week, and now I'm sitting by myself singing a shitty parody of Hey There Delilah. It's late at night for this by myself. I'm truly losing my marbles here. Oh, don't ever tell him that I said this, but I fucking miss Richard. So first question on the Docscord comes from the moral compass of the Docscord, who asks, Ibram X. Kendi wrote that a lot of the classic stories featuring apes, example, King Kong, Jungle Book, were racist characterizations of black people. To what extent do you believe that is true in DC Comics? Good question. Let's just, as I always do, let's just acknowledge I'm the wrong person to answer this. Okay. Break it down a couple of ways. First way is, I'm sure you could dig and not even have to dig necessarily all that hard to find an example of outright racistly portrayed apes where they're clearly meant to be like racist characterizations of black people or whatever. I'm positive those exist. They must be out there. When we're talking about the characters that we've been talking about so far tonight, Monsieur Mala, an enemy of the Doom Patrol, Gorilla Grodd, Solavar, things like that. I think it's a little less overt if it's there at all, meaning that these are characters where it's like, what's cool? Gorillas, make them bad guys, blah, blah, blah. And it's a little less of an overt racism thing. A character like Kongorilla is the gorilla itself is not racist necessarily, but what's racist is that a white guy comes to Africa and gets Africa magic. You know what I mean? Like, if the idea is that there's a magic ring that puts your spirit into this mystical gorilla that lives on that continent, it sucks that a white guy gets that power. Just like it sucks that Mike Maxwell finds the helmet and the elixir that turns him into Bwana Beast. That sucks, because those are artifacts in a cave on Kilimanjaro that's supposed to be there for presumably someone more local. So those have a racism in them that way. I imagine there's a certain amount of commentary that you could put in here about. I'm thinking about Grodd specifically, but Mala does this too. And, even Ultra Humanite as a character does this too, we start throwing around words like evolved, like being more or less evolved, or, humans, the way they do things, like, and it's not racism in the way where it's like, and these are the sort, like, it's not like what I'm trying to say is, it's not like, quote, anti-white racism, a thing that doesn't exist. But I do think that in making some of these ape characters, especially the super intelligent ones or the super sentient ones or the ones that are great engineers or whatever the fuck, in having them express these views of humanity, we're sort of telling on ourselves about how we view cultures and people that we deem to be less equal to ours. Like, the idea is that we're supposed to go, hey, humanity's got lots to offer, blah, 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 blah. Just because you apes have flying cars doesn't mean we're not. And they go like, ugh, God, you haven't even solved fucking humans, blah, blah, blah. And it's that sort of thing where it's like, where did we get the idea that they would feel that way about us? Is it because we routinely would like feel that way or depict that way in our pop culture about like, like we go back to the tropes of like the noble savage kind of thing. And like, I'm having a hard time putting it to words, but I feel like there's an element of that thing that we talk about where it's like every time like Republicans say that a conspiracy is happening, the reveal is that they were doing it. Attempted voter fraud or whatever, like collusion or whatever, that sort of thing. It's always that they were doing it. That's why they think of it. And that's why they think other people are doing it. And I think in writing some of these ape characters as being smugly moral, like smugly superior, or believing themselves to be more evolved or whatever, or believing humans to be like savage or barbaric or whatever, we're sort of telling on ourselves that like that's what we as like Western white societies, that was the exact attitude that we had to people from Africa or to First Nations over here or to things like that. Like I do think there's a case to be made. There's probably a thesis somewhere written about this. I'm sure people much smarter than me have already talked about this to death, but there's probably a certain degree of that kind of racism baked into those characters. But like I say, there's layers, right? Like there's that kind of more like ingrained sort of telling on yourself kind of racism. I'm sure you could also find just like someone drew like a quote gorilla with like, like the sort of Al Jolson makeup kind of thing. And you're like, that's just fully racist, like that's no good. And then, like I said, there's like the Bwana Beast Conquerilla thing of like, yeah, well, we want some like tribal, like animal powers. We'll give it to a white guy. It's like, well, that's its own kind of racist too, I think there's some layers to the racism of some of these characters, and there's an argument to be made for all of them, I think. And by that, I don't mean an argument to be made that racism's good. I just mean an argument to be made that they are indeed racist on some level. So there you go. It's a very roundabout way of saying I don't really know, but yes, probably. Next question comes from Drago the Black Rose, who asks, are there any apes that have beef with each other? Like they just legit hate each other? Yeah, 100% there are. I mean, Gorilla Grodd's it doesn't exactly play nice with anybody. So, we've talked about Solovar. They obviously have like a political rivalry, both kind of fighting for control of Gorilla City, and beyond just control of Gorilla City, control of the soul of Gorilla City. You know what I mean? Solovar, I think, brings out the best in the citizens of Gorilla City, whereas Grodd is more of a despot and really stokes the sort of the anti-human sort of hatred and that. It's essentially like the difference between having Aquaman on the throne or having Ocean Master on the throne. You know what I mean? So Grodd and Solovar obviously don't get along, but Grodd doesn't get along with fucking anybody. He fucking hates the Ultra Humanite because the Ultra Humanite is like a quote abomination. You know what I mean? Like a human brain in an ape body. Like, how dare you desecrate like an ape body with that? He's like a mad science experiment. So Grodd doesn't like that either. Back to Grodd again in the Salvation Run series, which is in the lead up to Final Crisis. Basically, the Suicide Squad rounded up all the villains and they basically boom tubed them to a prison planet elsewhere in the universe. And they were like, great, we'll just leave them there. And I'm sure that's the end of that. We won't have to deal with that ever. And on that planet, I'm pretty sure, Grodd beats Mala to death with the brain, which is so fucked up because the brain and Mala have this romance or whatever. And I'm pretty sure, Grodd just picks up Brain, because Brain is just a brain in a giant like cylinder, essentially. Picks up Brain and beats Mala to death with it. Grodd doesn't play nice. He doesn't get along. He's probably the one with the most beef with other apes. Monkey Prince and Ultra Humanite have beef. They're related, and there's some tension in there. So that's definitely in there. Yeah. Those are the big ones. I'm sure there's some other kind of smaller examples, but those are the big ones I would say. Next question comes from Yokrowo, who asks, do you think Sam Simeon and Angel O'Day were ever romantically involved? Everyone deserves love and to be loved. Even the worst people in the DC universe need love. Love you both, even if you can't accept it. Just know I care about you. # Summer of Kindness, baby. First of all, love you, Yokro. You're great. I can accept it. I don't know when I haven't accepted your love. I disagree. Not everyone deserves love. The worst people don't deserve love. So this is my strong stance for the episode. Okay, let's talk about Angel and the Ape. So we brought this up as an example of this was when we were talking about this is from when our showcase episode or about anthology comics or about I truly don't remember when this came up. Angel and the Ape, though, was Sam Simeon and Angel O'Day as like detective partners or whatever. We've talked about them before in the last couple of months, and I'm pretty sure that I went on record saying they have not been romantically involved. I'm pretty sure they haven't. That seems crazy. Why would they do that? Since that time, this is not the only time I've been asked follow-up, like, are you sure kind of versions of that. And so I did dig a little bit deeper, and I found an example. Again, I'm pretty sure Grodd is implicated in this as the bad guy, because Grodd is Sam Simeon's grandfather. That wasn't always the case, but that has since been retconned to be true. Angel O'Day has like a half sister who was on the Inferior Five or whatever, and for a bit, I think she sort of fancied Sam Simeon. And they were friends. And at one point, Sam gets captured and Grodd is like telepathically kind of probing him. He discovers that Sam is not into Angel's half-sister. Sam has romantic feelings for Angel. And I don't remember if it's in this story or in a separate but continuing kind of chapter of this story. Sam is briefly turned human and they kiss. He and Angel actually do kiss. It seems to be pretty brief though, and then they go back to a more kind of business relationship, I think. Just so that we're avoiding some of the interspecies sort of questions. It's funny, like the brain and Monsieur Mala are essentially in the same scenario, but because the brain is already a disembodied brain, I think we don't care about it, which just shows how, it's weird where brains draw lines, I think, pun intended. But yeah, Sam Simeon was briefly turned human, did kiss Angel O'Day. They have had a romantic interchange. He has had romantic feelings for her, but have they like hooked up? No. Are they like still together? I don't think so. I don't think that's a thing. On the Justice League Unlimited cartoon, just on this note, they definitely position Giganta and Grodd as a thing for a bit there. But that show never gives Giganta the gorilla backstory. So she's just a woman into Grodd. And then later in that show, Tala, the sorceress, is also like sort of seducing Grodd and stuff like that. So it's weird, a weird pattern of like, yeah, human women with male apes in comics and in cartoons. Not really sure where I'm going with that other than to say that it happens. But yeah, I suppose some people deserve love. Yeah, Sam Simeon deserves love. And maybe in a different life or a different set of circumstances, he and Angel O'Day could have been happy. But I don't think they ever actually make a go of it. But they have kissed. Their feelings were known briefly. All right, next question comes from the Lord Your Butt, who asks, does Monsieur Mala partake in other French customs besides speaking the language and wearing berets? That's very funny. So yeah, Monsieur Mala, an enemy of the Doom Patrol, a member of the Brotherhood of Evil, and often lover of the brain, although right now they're actually broken up. They're on the rocks. But yeah, Mala is always depicted as, he's often depicted as carrying like a giant gun or like a minigun or something. He's always wearing a beret, and obviously with a name like Monsieur Mala, he speaks French. What else does he do? I mean, I think he definitely, I think, appreciates like nice wine and cheese, and I feel like I've seen a comic where he's like set up like a nice wine and cheese kind of thing for him in the brain, which is so insane because it's like, does a gorilla like this? And also like, does a brain in the jar like this? I do think he probably has an appreciation for some of the finer things just by virtue of being French, you know. Those things are just inherent. You're just, listen, I know I was talking down about like the gorilla superiority thing, but like, it's not really about gorilla superiority. It's more like French superiority. Like, you just know you're better than other people when you're French. And I think that's fine to admit. It's good to be even, is to be that smug. That's inherently French sort of trait. Yeah, I probably his arrogance, is that a inherently French trait? We could throw that in there. Yeah, I mean, obviously a master lovemaker, if we're going with just inherently French skill sets. Yeah, interesting. Before any of you motherfuckers out there make some sort of fucking surrender joke, that's not how Mala rolls, and therefore it's not inherently French. So that's my thesis statement there. Yeah, I mean, there's probably a long legacy of them going, well, if he wears a beret, he must also buy baguettes or drink wine, or, you know, like they must do all that kind of shit. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere along the way he had a cigarette and a long cigarette holder or something like that. Like, I think Mala is probably extremely French. Next question from Fingerstripes13, who asks, how is Monkey Prince related to Ultra Humanite? And have either of them done anything recently? So, in the Monkey Prince book, it was revealed that, yes, he is indeed related to the Ultra Humanite. He's actually the Ultra Humanite's grandson. So, the Ultra Humanite's daughter is Monkey King's mother, or Monkey Prince's mother. There's a whole thing where the Monkey King got trapped in the Phantom Zone, and they tie that to Ultra Humanite because he was trying to do something, and then that's obviously a connection to Superman and all this sort of stuff. But a little piece of the Monkey King escaped and became the Monkey Prince. And so there's this connection that way. And then, what have they done since, though? I mean, that's relatively recent. And Ultra Humanite, I think, did show up in that April special. What's the most recent thing from Ultra Humanite? I mean, that was all taking place during or around Lazarus Planet and stuff like that. So, like, we're basically talking, like, within the last, like, year and a bit, we were talking about how Monkey Prince and Ultra Humanite are connected, which, again, going back to that earlier question, is like, that's a relatively, I know Monkey Prince was like a maxi series and it's sort of its own thing, but that's a relatively like prominent featuring for a character as weird as the Ultra Humanite. And especially considering that, you know, we're trying to tie in his connection to Superman there, that he'd shown up in Superman and the Authority a few years earlier, that we have this new Justice Society book and he could theoretically show up there. Like, it's probably a decent time to be an Ultra Humanite fan. We haven't talked about it yet, but there's a weird version of the Ultra Humanite that showed up in the New 52, also connected to the Phantom Zone, I'm pretty sure. But this one was that it was like an alien, like, being that fed on fear. So in the New 52 Superman, there's an arc called, I think it's called Horrorville, where this like fear thing, like entity basically, but not Parallax, kind of like infects and takes over Smallville. And that is either in the middle of or right after the arc, the Doomed arc, where Superman had ingested all those Doomsday spores. But the Ultra Humanite there is like a giant like tentacle beast or some shit like that. Like, not a scientist, not someone that put their brain in a gorilla, just a totally different thing. A very weird version of the Ultra Humanite that is no longer a thing, but technically bore the name. And so just a weird thing to mention. Last question from JK, who asks, when did Gorilla Grodd's whole eating people's brains thing start? So Grodd, has always, like, he's the telepathy thing's been a part for a long time. The super intelligence thing's been a part of him for a long time. But there is this sort of thing now about like eating brains and gaining knowledge, like that sort of idea. I don't know 100% when it started, but I'll tell you when I noticed it is the New 52. New 52 Grodd had a couple of, like, I remember this being like a pretty prominent thing about eating brains, or about even saying we're going to eat brains or whatever. But it was also tied to the fact that in the New 52, Grodd had some access to the Speed Force. And this is what I was talking about too, where we keep messing with like, what's Gorilla City's connection to some of like the more mythic sides of DC or the cosmic sides of DC. And part of that was like, he wanted to eat Flash's brain to gain the Speed Force, or like gain more of the Speed Force or something like that. That's when I remember that coming up a lot. And I feel like since that time, I've seen it a lot. Almost certainly he has said offhand, like, I'll eat your brains or something like that in an earlier comic. But as far as it being like a hook or a bit of Grodd's, a thing where he's like, and I'll do this and I'll gain something from it. It's not just like a threat or something savage to do. It's like there's a purpose to it. My guess is it's somewhere, if it's not just straight up the New 52, it's somewhere around there. It's like in the couple of years before it or whatever. That feels like it feels recent to me. I think I would be surprised to learn that he was like eating brains to gain knowledge earlier than that. You know what I mean? That's what it feels like to me anyway. Well, there you go. That's the final question in our Apes episode. Thank you, everybody, for writing in for that one. That was a ton of fun. If you have a question for next week's episode, should I just tell you what that is? Yeah, might as well, right? So we've talked before on the show. I have a theory that there's kind of like, I mean, there's lots of different types of villains and arch enemies for characters, but there's two kind of big, like cornerstone ones. One is the polar opposite kind of character. So Batman and the Joker, Superman and Lex Luthor, you know, those kind of things. And then there's like the dark reflection, the mirrored version. So Superman and Bizarro or Superman and Zod, Flash and Reverse Flash, Aquaman and Ocean Master. So next week, send your questions about those dark reflections, the mirror villains. Pick one. You know, maybe you have a theory about someone who is kind of a mirror villain to someone else, and maybe it's not like an obvious one. Send a question about that. Send questions about the obvious ones. It doesn't matter which characters. It doesn't even have to be questions about how they're mirrors necessarily, but just send questions about those types of characters. I think that would be a lot of fun. And you can send those anywhere on social media. We're Dr. DC Podcast, wherever you can find us. We've got a subreddit. That's r/Dr_DC. Hey, you feel like hopping on the phone? Doc phone is open. 208-917-3238. That's 208-917-DCEU if you're nasty. You can send us an email, drdcpodcast@gmail.com. And guess what? We got a Patreon, baby. If you want to give us a little bit of extra support, there's a $1, $5, $7 level, all available at patreon.com/DrDC. At all those levels, they give you access to the Discord, our awesome Discord fan community. And at the higher levels, you get bonus episodes, the Double Dose, and bonus series, rewatch series like Toretto Talks, Bonding Time, or the current one, Cerebros, going through all of the Fox X-Men movies right now. That all helps to support us. But hey, listen, you might just want even more of us, and you might want it for free. Go check out Ghost Facers, a Supernatural rewatch podcast. We're working our way through every single episode of the CW Supernatural. We talk about real world monster lore, behind the scenes stuff about the show. It's a really, really fun time. We're partway through season 9 right now, which is crazy. Season 9 of 15. So we're over halfway, which is sort of wild to think about. And yeah, that's it. We'll see you next week.
Adios. Ciao, ciao.
Heroes, they always fight for what is right. Live with danger and adventure, they are men of might.
This was a Brain Freeze podcast.